Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. I hope you can see my slides, otherwise please let me know. So hi everyone, my name is Nuria and I'm based at Queen Mary. So for today I wanted to give an overview on the current status of games for motor rehabilitation. So motor rehabilitation aims to facilitate the or relearning of certain motor skills that might have been lost due to different reasons, from a sports accident to a neurological disorder. So conventionally, therapists guide patients in very specific movements, but for this to be effective, they need to perform many repetitions. So this ends up being quite boring and often is difficult for the patients to see objective improvements, which can be very demotivating. And it's also usually limited to when the therapist is available. So games have been used as a tool for motor rehab, as they can allow for more engaging training methods. With games, you can also provide feedback, both while the patients are playing in a rewarding manner, but also if you record some of the motions, you can obtain objective metrics that can be sent to the therapist such that they can track the recovery. When used with simple controllers, games can be used for home-based therapy, which means that the patient keeps exercising even if the therapist is not present. However, I wanted to highlight that games aim to serve as a tool for the therapist and not to replace them. So when you design a system for motor rehabilitation that relies on games, there are two main things that you should be considering. So the first one is the controller, and the second is the game itself. So regarding the controller, you would have to choose what kind of skill or motion do you want to be training, and you need to choose a controller that is able to actually capture that kind of motion, which will be influenced by the sensing modality. There are some already commercially available controllers, so you might be able to use one of those. Otherwise, you might have to adapt them or to design your own. And regarding the game, I just wanted to go over some of the aspects that have been discussed in the literature. So first, social games versus single-player games, the influence of the visual interfaces, and then also some of the difference between commercially available games that are currently being used in clinics versus rehab-specific games. So let's start with the controller. As you can see in this figure, different studies report training of different body parts, the hips, the fingers, the elbow, the arm. However, most of these game interventions do involve upper limb rehabilitation. This can be because upper limb impairment is actually quite common after suffering from a stroke, which is actually a disease that is very targeted in the literature. And another thing that could influence this is that game interventions, when being used from home, might be actually safer if they target upper limb, especially because without supervision, if you are training the lower limb, you might risk the patient to fall. Another thing that appeared in the literature is that gross motor skills are addressed more often than finer motor skills. So, for example, arm movement versus finger movements. And this might actually be affected by the controller sensing modalities. So let's get into that. Very broadly speaking, there are two kind of sensing modalities. The first one would be vision systems. So these ones are those that rely on cameras, and within this, Kinect tends to be very widely reported. The issue with vision systems is that the performance might be affected by environmental conditions, such as, for example, the light or occlusion, and they might also fail to detect some of these finer motions, like finger movements. However, you can add a secondary system that can look at particularly that finer motion if you want to be looking at that. With regards to no vision systems, there are many of them looking at many different metrics. So for example, the Wiimote, you can look at position in space, the Myoband, which looks at muscle activity, you can be looking at force detection. The issue that this controller have is that they might fail to measure the joint angles or the body positioning, precisely because they are focusing on one particular area and not at the entire thing. And sometimes patients tend to perform compensatory motions, so you might be missing if this is happening. So I just wanted to go over some of the most mentioned commercial systems. First, so yeah, with regards to the vision systems, Kinect and iToy have been both used and have been shown potential to enhance upper limb motor function, at least in stroke patients. They are low cost, they are easy to use, and they are safe. And Kinect is the most widely used. It's actually used by many companies with rehab-specific games. And of course, these systems, they have the limitation that the vision systems have. We has also been widely reported. It's been shown that stroke patients could operate the Wiimote with strapping and under supervision. So Wii is an user-friendly, low-cost system, and it has many accessories. So you can train upper limb by using the Wiimote, but you can also train the lower limb by using the Wii Balance or the mat. So a lot of flexibility. It does have some limitations. There have been some studies that have reported lesions. So for example, hand lacerations due to the strapping, but also some falls. And of course, there is the risk of the patient from performing compensatory movements. And just to highlight that some more recent studies have also used Nintendo Switch. So some studies have also used Dance Dance Revolution. This allows for training the lower limb, postural and balance. It's been described as fun and challenging. However, some patients have also described it as distracting or confusing, and possible falls might have happened. If you cannot use some of these commercial controllers because they might not be accessible to all patients, you might need to adapt them. So these are a couple of examples. So for example, this is on the left a Wiimote in which you can access the buttons by pressing on external switches. And on the right, this company, NeoFect, built this device, which is inspired by a Dance Dance Revolution mat, but is more accessible and is safer, and probably patients would have less risk of falling. Actually, a lot of companies and several research groups do manufacture their own devices from scratch. So I just put this slide to show that there are many of them focusing on many different skills and many different motions and using many different sensing modalities. The issue is that, of course, they are less available for a normal audience, and some of them can actually be quite expensive. Talking about the games themselves, there has been a discussion over what can be the benefits of using social games in motor rehabilitation. So, of course, social games might further increase motivation, and they have been described as an engaging and interactive tool to help reconnect patients with their social environments. In addition, some studies have suggested that when playing competitively, the arousal ratings and the physiological responses were greater when competing against a human than when competing against a computer. And in collaborative games, the patient's performance can be leveled by the performance of a more skilled partner. There's currently research happening in how to tailor these games so that they can be more effective. Regarding the visual interface and the graphics that the game uses, using more complex graphics does have some advantages, so it can be more immersive, more engaging, and it might represent daily activities more accurately. So now keep in mind that the ultimate goal of this motor rehabilitation is to have the patient be able to recover this independency in performing their daily life activities, right? So being able to represent an environment where they can actually practice these particular activities that they are going to be doing after they recover can be quite useful. However, some these more complex graphics can have some disadvantages. First, they might not be accessible to all patients with some cognitive impairments, and also some older patient groups might not be comfortable with the more immersive environments. So both commercial games and rehab-specific games have been used and reported. So starting with the commercial games, there are many available and many that have been used, from the packages that we or Kinect used to some individual games. They have the advantages that they can be used with off-the-shelf controllers, so they are ideal for patients to play from home. They are very fun and very engaging. However, they do have some limitations. They can be quite difficult for some of the patients, and the game parameters, like for example, the speed that the motion needs to be performed, or the range of motion that's required, might not be adjustable. And this can lead to frustration or, again, to compensatory motions. Another issue is that the motions practice are not always related to function. So as we were saying, because the end goal is to be able to perform these daily life activities, sometimes you need to train specific movements that will prepare you for that. And these games do not always offer them. A third issue is that the game scores do not necessarily correspond to motor recovery. So being able to achieve 3 stars out of 4 does not necessarily match being able to flex your wrist by 15 degrees more, which is what the therapist would be actually tracking. And there has been reported a lack of clear evidence to reach generalizable conclusions, so still research is required. So rehab-specific games are, however, designed for specific rehabilitation purposes. So for specifically training balance or for specifically training strength. And usually when developing them, there are several steps involved in a loop in which usually a therapist is being present. So the first step is the therapy selection. So what skill do I want to be training? What patient group should be targeted? And how is this traditionally done in a clinic? The second one would be the interaction mechanism. So what device can actually capture this therapy? What controller should I be using? The third one is the interaction element. So how can I ensure that this particular therapy is performed correctly? How can I ensure that the patient is not compensating by moving their trunk where they should be moving only the elbow? The first step would be the actual game development. So building a game that can encourage the patient to perform this particular therapy regularly and in an enjoying manner. And finally, test the prototype at this stage and then keep iterating with the therapist in the loop. So there is a general agreement that the games developed need to be flexible, varied, and of balanced difficulty, such that they can target several or different individuals at different stages of the recovery. So I included some pictures of some of these rehab-specific games that some companies have developed. And yeah, in summary, games have proven to be a useful addition to conventional therapy. There are many options, both in terms of the games and the controllers. However, the combination of game parameters, and the controller must be carefully chosen so that the training is effective. And in particular with commercial systems and commercial games, even if they are widely used, there is still a lack of clear evidence to reach generalizable conclusions. So yeah, in general, research is still needed to unify and improve video games as a rehab tool. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. These are my contact details in case you would like to discuss this further. And if you have any questions, I'm gonna close this so that I can actually see what's happening.